Well, hello, everybody. I always love that last shot as we're getting ready to come on here is you and I smiling. Like, I just love that picture of us. Sorry, I digress for a second. But
It was
my name is
good.
Tiffany
I was
Bova.
smiling too. I love that as the final visual.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm Tiffany Bova. Welcome to Playing to Win Practitioner's Insight and my wonderful co-host.
Roger Martin, and it's great to be back for number 7.
Number 7. And for those of you who haven't known that we've been doing this series now over the last couple of months. We've got 6 shows prior. You can go back into my LinkedIn and look at events and watch the prior shows, which I think is super helpful. Today, we're going to talk about what would have to be true, but I think you may want to get a little bit of context before you get to this part of the series. And then it's also up on my YouTube channel, Tiffany Bova TV. And then Roger obviously shares everything in his amazing weekly newsletter that drops every Monday on Medium, and he gives links to what we're doing here on the show. So before we get started, I will tell you that I hadn't dug into what would have to be true for a minute. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna immerse myself in refreshing my understanding of what would have to be true. And I have to say, like, just the serendipitous timing of the topic of truth was just awesome, right? As I'm reading through that. So I'm gonna actually start with you just kind of grounding us in what is true, like, and how we've landed there.
Sure. So where I got to on this was what I came to realize, that in the world of business and in the world of strategy in particular, there's an obsession about declaring what is true. So people will do massive amounts of analysis to be able to declare something is true. Consumers like this. Our cost structure is that. And what I found is that people would fight like crazy over what is true. And what I found is that if I asked them the question instead, what would have to be true for the following to be a good idea, it helped out in an enormous number of ways and caused me to call it the most important question in strategy. So it turns out that most strategies that are long-lived and successful actually make something true that wasn't true at the time. So if you ask the question in 2005 or 6, is it true that people like to type on glass? The answer would have been, no, that's definitively false. They don't. They type on keyboards, and typing on glass is kind of weird. And if Steve Jobs would have been satisfied with that answer, we wouldn't have gotten the iPhone, or at least it wouldn't look at all like it does now. And the entire world would not be totally comfortable typing on glass. But what is true doesn't help you there. What would have to be true? How could we make something an experience that would cause people to try this new thing that feels a bit odd at first, but then within half an hour they get used to it, and then they forget that they ever worried about, oh, can I type on glass? So it helps you think about the future, what might be, rather than what is. So what is true, I think, causes you to think there are fewer possibilities, exciting possibilities. What would have to be true put some agency to you, where you say, well, I know it's not true yet, but what could I do to make it that thing true that would have to be true for this to succeed? So I like the degree to which it is kind of forward thinking. The other thing I like about it is if you think about it just conceptually, the question, what is true? When you try to determine what is true, it has 2 pieces that we tend to kind of merge together. One is a logic structure, and the second is data. Okay, so let's imagine you say, oh, my logic is a bigger plant has lower costs because you can spread the fixed costs across more unit volume. That is a statement of the logic of how you think something happens, right? Then if you if you want to decide whether that's true or not, you go out and look at 100 plants of greatly varying sizes and do a regression and say, are bigger plants lower cost or not? So you've taken a logic structure and applied data to it. Often why people disagree with one another, I say this is true, and Tiffany, you say no, this other thing is true. We disagree and don't know whether it's the logic structure, we're thinking about a different logic structure, or different data. And if you ask the question, what would have to be true, there's no data to get in the way yet, right? And so you tend to be able to agree on logic. What I find I can get entire management teams to do is come to agreement on, if this set of things, X set of things would have to be true, we do A. And if this other set of things were true, we do B. And they agree on that in advance, right? So we say, okay, so if these are true, we do A. And if these are true, we do B. Can we everybody put their hands on their hearts and say that's what they would do? You can get them to agree on that. Then you can dive into, what about the things that would have to be true are we most worried might not be true? And then you can do analysis about those things, because those things, the things where this would have, to launch the iPhone, what would have to be true is people will accept typing on glass. And we can then ask ourselves the question, how can we get ourselves more comfortable that would be the case? Could we do little tests? Could we look at other industries? Oh yeah, actually they typed on some tablets, right? So and some people, typed on, waiters and waitresses typed on software systems that had a little tablet. You can start getting yourself comfortable with the data to go along with the logic that you'd agreed on. So I find those just incredibly valuable when you're trying to get a group to make a strategy choice.
Yeah, I have found, at least in my years of arguable successful or challenging times, right, is that when I would come in and say, I think we should make a change in how we're attacking the strategy, right?
Yeah.
Like, so we were, launching into a new market. It was just going really slowly. I think we have to repivot. Let's do something else. The goal was, right, growth, whatever that might be. And so I'd sit the executives in a room, my colleagues and peers, and even, sort of above me and below me, and be like, this is what I think. What I found most frequently was that we couldn't come into agreement on what the reality was in the ground. Like, was it working, not working? Why is it working? Why is it not working? What is the context of the market that we would then make it, or in what is the context of what it is we might do next? There may be a disagreement in that context. And when I say context, I mean, like, who is the target customer? Why do they buy? Kind of the things that we've discussed in previous of our sessions here. And when I had no agreement, it just became this frustrating hamster wheel of fighting on the context and on the truth, if you will. Like,
Yes.
Is it 10% growth? No, I see 6. Well, I see 14, and we all fight about the number. And I think that's where a lot of time is wasted versus saying, okay, sometimes I would just go, okay, it's somewhere between 8 and 6 and 14. But we have to agree that it's not 30 where we want it to be. Like, regardless of what the starting point is, can we at least get to the fact that we know we need to change something, right? And I found myself spending a lot of time emotionally arguing that fight versus doing it with data, and then letting the data try and tell the story. And at first I thought that was a better approach, and it worked well the first couple times. Then kind of, let's call it the 4th or 5th time, then we started arguing about the validity of the data. Right? And so it became another argument of, it wasn't just the things or the context that we might not agree is true, but then the data was not true. And if you just have no ability to say, can we put a flag in the sand somewhere of where we're sort of starting, you just don't get any forward momentum.
Yeah. And here's what the advice I would give in that situation, Tiffany, would be to say, okay, guys, you think 30. You think 30 is still possible. You're in the mindset of saying, no,
Yep.
it's going to be 8. But
Yep.
rather than say it's not going to be 30, is to say, okay, let's think about what would have to be true for it to be 30. So use the what would have to be true question. So how many customers would we need? How much would they have to buy each? What would we have to believe competitors will do while we're doing these things? What do we have to believe about the distribution channel, if there's a distribution channel, whatever? You'd lay out all those what would have to be truths, and then say, well, actually on those, we can tell what is currently the case. It's 8 and it's not 30, and it's this many customers, not that many customers, whatever. Okay, now what sort of actions would be possible to make what isn't currently true, that would need to be true enough to get us to the 30? Because by decomposing in that way to the factors of what would have to be true, what I find is that those people who still believed in 30 would look at it and then say, ew, no, getting customer purchase per whatever purchase per year or purchase per quarter up from 12 to 87. I guess I don't see the steps that we could take to do that, and that then sort of gets them thinking, well, maybe the logic behind the 30 is flawed, as opposed to arguing a lot about the data. You get them to think about the logic, and then you could say, so here's a logic that I have about what could an alternative approach be. We could do this, and what we'd have to believe is customers would react well to this, and competitors da 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 da. Do you think that logic, how does it compare to the logic of the 30 pursued the way we are currently now? And why I do that is because dueling logics are better than one single logic. When you have one single logic, people are inclined to say, well, what about this? What about that? I'm not sure about this. Da, 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 da. And instead, what I try to get at is, we're going to have to pick a logic. We're going to have to either keep doing what we're doing, that logic, which is based on this, or we can pick this other one. Now, which do we think is a stronger logic? Then they'll engage on what I think is a productive question, which is not what's perfection, but kind of what's better than another. And again, what would have to be true allows you to lay out those competing logics.
Yeah, and that conversation, I'll just go back to that example, was literally, we want to build a $300 million business. Okay. Then it was like, how many customers, at the time it was selling through distribution channels. So how many partners would we need?
Yep.
How much could they sell? How quickly could we get them to, $1 million per partner, kind of a thing, right? So I'm doing total basic math. If it was a $300 million business and each does $1 million, you need 300 partners. How, I'm doing very basic math, right?
Yep. And we have 27 now or something. And so we've got to get to from there to 100 or whatever.
Right. And state school math, not MBA math. So
that's
$1 million
all
each.
You need, baby.
So, and then it was, okay, well, we can't recruit all day one. We're going to recruit them over the next, and we called them periods. So not quarters, because it was 8 quarters of time to get to $1 million. But you couldn't say that, because then everybody thought it was just 8 quarters. Not if you got a new partner in the second quarter, that's their first quarter. Right. So I had to use a different word. Right. Yes. So it was sort of 8 periods, and it started, but it was over 8 quarters. Right. Yeah. So we knew we could recruit X partners per period or quarter. And then the math sort of, and so we all agreed on the hypothesis, like what would have to be true. We'd have to recruit 15 a quarter. they'd each have to do, X amount over the next 7 quarters. And this is what, all the things we had to do. And so we were in kind of period 3, and it was literally the 3rd quarter. It was a 2-year plan. And the executives said, we're going to cut the people internally supporting this effort almost in half.
Yeah.
Okay. But then the assumptions didn't change. Nope. Still have to recruit the partners, 300 partners. They still have to do $1 million. You still have to do all those things, but you're going to have to do it with half the resources, half the spend, whatever it was. I'm like, well, then the assumptions are changing, right? So then the truth is I wasn't using these words, right? But to play this out, right? Then the truth is no longer valid, right? Because we agreed that the truth was, in order for this to happen, here are the things we would have to do. Do we all agree? Right. And when the parameters changed, then the context changed. And so while the truth was unachievable, right? That goal became unachievable. And I couldn't get him to renegotiate the assumption. I'm like, so the assumptions we all agreed upon are no longer valid? Is that what you're? No, they're still valid. I'm like, yeah, but half of that assumption was people-based and money-based, right? Yeah. And so I feel like many executives get stuck in the moving of the goalpost, or they're not very disciplined on the assumptions. And so when things change, they're not willing to go back and go, hold on, the assumption has changed, right? Like you said, people are starting to adopt typing on glass. We know we can get there.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess what I think of that is, so lots of people would listen to you, Tiffany, and say Tiffany was because analyzing, and she was crunching the data. In fact, you weren't, not to nearly the extent that you were laying out the logic. And this is the shortcut that I think people make at their peril, which you weren't doing. You were laying out the logic. So the logic was this. The only thing I would have said to do a little bit more of is, okay, let's just review the new logic. Okay, so that old logic has gone away, you're saying, because we have half the people. And so what's the new logic? Oh, okay, each salesperson is going to be twice as effective in signing up partners as they were before. So that's the logic that adds up to the number. And so again, for me, I use the what would have to be true as a tool for making sure we can agree on the logic, because you could have eventually got them to agree on that logic, right? Which is yes. So we had X number of people. Now that means Y new partners per person. Now we have half as number of people, so it means 2 times Y the number of partners per person. Help me understand the logic that says the people who could only do 1x before can do 2x now. So that's not arguing about the data, because there is no data about that really, about if they're put in a position to do that, could they do it or not. But you can say they were actually struggling with 1x, and what would have to be true for them to be able to go from 1x to 2x. And by putting that in the hands of the person who's put forward that logic, because in some sense they put forward the logic. We can do 300 million in the time we said with half as many people. That is their that is a grosso modo. That's their logic. But what I find is that you have to help them unpack it, because often people are not clear at all on their own logic. In this case, they've just got 300 in mind, and they say, what the hell, we can get there. You have to help them say, let's just unpack that. And you're not disagreeing with them. You're not saying, I think your logic is stupid. The best solution is when they do what would have to be true. You help them lay it out. And so they then say, I can't support my own logic now that it's been laid out. Which is why, by the way, I always ask people to reverse engineer. I take them through an exercise of reverse engineering the current strategy. So what would have to be true for what we're now doing to actually produce the results we're doing? And I can't tell you how many times, Tiffany, their answer at the end of it is, makes no sense. My own logic makes no sense now that we've laid it out. But they were busily doing it. And it's because people don't think enough about the logic behind why they do what they do.
Well, I'll tell you this, and there was no reason for you to really correct. This was super early in my career, I have to say. I didn't have the right language, tools, understanding of how to overcome this roadblock I'd hit with these executives at all. So you correcting what I was really doing is totally valid, right? Because I just did not know how. I kept trying. It was an emotional fight. Okay, that's not going to work. I'm going to try logical. Okay, that didn't work. Like I tried, okay, let's do assumptions. Like, okay, that didn't work. I mean, you know what I mean? Like I was ill prepared. I was ill prepared to be able to share that. And that it taught me a really good lesson, right? That I had to find a way. And I find that even after that particular experience, setting quota, setting revenue goals is almost very similar, right? It's kind of like executives will be like, we did X last year. We're going to do X plus 10% or 20% or 30% this year, and go, right? Tiffany, go, team, go. And I'm like, okay, well, what has changed to get productivity and performance out of the existing team to, 30% improvement? We have no new systems, no new tools, no new training, no new lead, no new marketing spend. No, if everything constant, what has changed in your mind, right? And so they set these unrealistic goals, but then to your point, which you just said a few minutes ago, they for sure are not willing to go, maybe that was the wrong quota.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
You're bringing back horrible memories for me, Tiffany. One of my biggest managerial defeats in the good old days at Monitor Company, when I was one of the 4 people running this big global consulting firm, and Europe wasn't doing all that well compared to North America and Asia, which were doing great, selling like hotcakes, I guess. And so we were like, the then CEO was saying, well, we've got to get Europe growing to a much greater extent. Okay, and so we have capacity now to do whatever it was at the time, 50 million in Europe. We need to grow 20%. We need to increase our capacity 20%. So we're going to go to the business schools and hire a whole lot more so that we have 20% more consultants. So his logic was, we can do 50, we could do 70 if we had essentially 40% more consultants. My argument was, we have $50 million of selling capacity. All those MBAs we're going to hire fresh out of whatever, INSEAD, LBS, Harvard, Stanford, whatever, have zero selling capacity. They have a lot of costs and zero selling capacity. My prediction is we're going to do $50 million of business next year too, with 40% more people. And he was like, oh, you just don't believe, whatever. And we hired 40% of people, more people, did exactly the same revenue, had a huge loss. And so I feel your pain. And I wasn't as good then at being able to say, let's lay out the logic here. How is it, remind me again, how is it that the $70 million is going to get sold? Okay. All the same people who sold $50 million next year will sell $70 million.
Yeah, all of a sudden, they were hitting 60% of quota. They're now going to hit 90% of quota just because they woke up because you told them to, right? And I think this, if you're listening to this and you're pounding your desk going, yes, 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 right? Like everybody faces this, and there is no one single answer.
Yes.
But I will tell you, if nothing else that you got out of it, right? If I had a Roger Martin, if I had a Playing to Win book, if I had the things that I now have done over the last 20 years since that conversation, right? I would approach it much differently, or would I don't know, right? But I would say to you that it has a lot to do with, when you watch shows like this with Roger and I, or you read a book, or you listen to a podcast or a TED Talk, whatever it is, it's about the language. It's about the approach. It's about coming and meeting them in a way that is the language of that executive. Are they data driven? Are they numbers driven? You know, are they very logical? Are they just, you know, picking a number out of the sky? One of the things, you know, that Roger talks about is, you know, kind of fact checking. So, well, we'll end on this, but it's sort of like, if you have an opinion on something, and again, how I started this by saying, just in the light of what's going on in the world, right? That if you have an opinion on something and someone fact checks you, it's highly unlikely it's going to change your opinion. Fair?
Yeah, yeah. Often because they're checking a fact that wasn't actually related to your logic. And that's why, again, logic and data are two components of analysis. That is what analysis is, applying data to a logical structure. And so people will fact check something that you just say, well, I don't care, that's not related to my logic. That is why asking the question, you know, the advice I give is try to stay away from what is true until you first ask what would have to be true. And if you ask what would have to be true, you can understand what data everybody in the conversation would think is the data we need to be able to determine the degree to which what would have to be true is true or can be made true. If you start with what is true, it'll be like basically dialogue out there in the economy today, which is everybody saying, no, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Here's my facts. No, you're wrong. That's all because we're starting with what is true and not what would have to be true.
And that is the whataboutism. We can
Yes.
always find a stat that will prove our point.
Sure.
Yep. You know?
Lies, damn lies, and statistics is true.
Well, listen, we could keep going, but you know, what would have to be true is we'd have to have a longer show that in order to keep going. But thank you everybody for joining us for the 7th of our series of Playing to Win Practitioners Insight. Don't forget to check out the prior shows either on my LinkedIn page and or my YouTube channel, Tiffany Bova TV. Don't forget to check out Roger's Medium newsletter that he does every week. I think it's like in the top 3 of Medium. It's such a great read. He posted on X, posted on LinkedIn and everywhere. But Roger, as always, it was a pleasure.
Likewise. Look forward to the next one.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.